The first thing you need to understand is that nobody was supposed to be at Dock 7 that night. Not me, not the maintenance crew, not the 3 Vetheran diplomats who were still arguing over docking protocols in the East Corridor, and definitely not her. But there she was, standing at the far edge of the platform, where the magnetic field shimmers like heat rising off summer asphalt, and if you don't know what you're looking at, you'd think it was just a glitch in the atmospheric filters. She was small. That's the thing I keep coming back to when I try to explain it to people. She was so small. And I don't mean small like a child. I mean small like something that had been compressed by gravity, like she'd been folded into herself by a universe that was too large and too loud and too fast for her. Her skin was the color of deep ocean water at dusk, not blue exactly, more like the moment right before blue becomes purple. And her eyes, I didn't get a good look at her eyes until later, but when I did, I'll tell you, I had to look away. Not because they were frightening, because they were the saddest things I'd ever seen in 41 years of watching people move through this station. I've seen a lot of things on Meridian Station. I've been stationed here since 2089, back when we were still calling it Orbital Platform 9 and the docking bays smelled like welding smoke and old coffee. I was here when the Cathari made first contact in the outer ring. I was here when Admiral Vasquez signed the accords on the observation deck and half the crew cried and half the crew stood very still because they didn't know what to do with their hands. I've seen strange. I've seen frightening. I've seen things that don't have names yet. But I'd never seen anything like what I saw that night on Dock 7. And I'd certainly never seen anything like what Marcus did. Let me back up. Meridian Station sits at the L2 Lagrange point. That's the gravitational sweet spot between Earth and the outer system, the place where two massive objects reach a kind of agreement. In 2091, after the Accords, the station was expanded 3 times in 18 months. They bolted new rings onto the original structure like adding floors to a building that was never designed to be tall. The result is something that looks from the outside like a collection of mistakes that somehow became a city. Docking spires that angle in 17 different directions. Observation domes that catch sunlight at odd hours and throw it in unexpected places. Corridors that were designed for human bodies, and then widened, hastily, awkwardly, for species that needed more room or different air or surfaces that didn't conduct electricity. It's loud most of the time, not in a bad way necessarily. It's the kind of loud that means life, cargo loaders humming, translation arrays running in 6 languages simultaneously. The deep bass vibration of ships docking and departing that you feel in your chest more than you hear it. By 2094, we had permanent residents from 11 different species, and a rotating population of traders, diplomats, scientists, and a category of person that the official registry just calls other, because nobody's found a better word yet. I'd been assigned to the Strategic Observation Unit for 3 years at that point. My job technically was threat assessment and interspecies incident prevention. What that actually meant was standing in rooms where things were about to go wrong and trying to make sure they didn't. I was good at it. I'd gotten good at reading people, human people, Cathari people, Vetheran people, even the Drell, who don't have faces in the conventional sense but who still somehow manage to communicate annoyance perfectly clearly. But I wasn't in Dock 7 because of a threat assessment. I was there because the atmospheric recycler in Corridor C had backed up again, and the smell was indescribable, and I'd taken the long way around to the cafeteria and gotten turned around near the maintenance junction, and ended up somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. That's how most things that change your life begin, I think. Not with a plan, with a wrong turn. The dock was quiet. Bay 7 was scheduled for maintenance from 1800 to 600, 12 hours of nothing, officially. The lights were at 30%, that dim amber tone they use when a section's in low-power mode, and it made the whole space feel like late evening in a place that never actually had evenings. The docking cradle was empty, a massive circular depression in the floor with magnetic guide rails running along the rim, and the outer doors were sealed, a round porthole of reinforced, composite the size of a house showing nothing but stars. I heard her before I saw her. Not sound exactly, more like a shift in the air. You know how, when you walk into a room where someone has been crying for a long time, there's something in the atmosphere that tells you before you even see them. A kind of weight. It was like that. Something heavy and private and exhausted. She was sitting on the edge of the docking cradle, legs hanging over the side, which should have triggered a safety alarm but didn't because the dock was in maintenance mode and half the sensor arrays were offline. She was wearing something that looked like it had once been formal, layered fabric in dark silver and deep gold, the kind of thing that speaks of occasion, of ceremony. But it was torn at the shoulder and stained with something dark along the left side that I tried not to think too hard about. She was holding something in both hands. Small, rectangular, a communications device of some kind, but not any format I recognized. She kept pressing something on its surface and then looking up at the sealed outer doors and then looking back down and pressing again. It wasn't working. I could tell it wasn't working by the way her shoulders dropped a little more each time. I stood there for probably 15 seconds longer than I should have, which is not something I'm proud of, but I want to be honest about it. My first instinct was not heroic. My first instinct was to assess the situation, threat level, species identification, possible explanations, and to do it from a distance safely, the way I'd been trained. Then she made a sound. It wasn't a word. Or if it wasn't in any language the translation array would have caught. It was more like a sound a person makes when they've been holding something very heavy for a very long time and their arms finally give out. Not a cry, exactly. Just the sound of something collapsing under its own weight. And I walked across the dock toward her. She heard me coming, her hearing must have been excellent, because I was trying to be quiet and she turned before I was within 20 feet. Her eyes went wide and her body went rigid, and for a moment I thought she was going to bolt or fight, and I put my hands up, palms out, which is apparently a universal gesture because she seemed to understand it. Easy, I said, I'm not going to hurt you. She stared at me. The translation array in my earpiece was running, scanning. It had access to 93 registered languages and 42 dialects. The small green light that blinked when it found a match stayed dark. She said something. Her voice was low, formal, precise, the cadence of someone who had been trained to speak carefully to choose words. I couldn't understand any of it, but I understood the shape of what she was doing. She was explaining herself, justifying her presence, the way someone does when they're not sure if they're safe. I don't have your language, I said, gesturing to my earpiece. Translation isn't picking you up, I'm sorry. She looked at the earpiece. Then she did something that surprised me. She touched her own temple, just below her left ear, and something there activated. A faint shimmer of light. And then she spoke again, and this time the words came through, fractured and imperfect, like a signal passing through interference, but understandable. You are station crew. Yes, I said. Strategic observation, Commander Yale Oren. You are not supposed to be here. No, I admitted, neither are you. She looked at me for a long moment. Then, impossibly, the corner of her mouth moved in something that might have been acknowledgement, not quite a smile, more like, fair point. I need help, she said. The translation was still rough, the words landing a little flat, a little delayed, but the meaning was clear. My communications are damaged. I cannot reach my escort. I cannot signal my ship. Where's your ship? She pointed at the sealed outer doors. On the other side of that. 11 kilometers, she said. Holding position, waiting. They do not know I am here. They believe I am still on the diplomatic shuttle. But the shuttle, she stopped, pressed her lips together. The shuttle was intercepted. I felt something shift in my chest. Not panic. I don't panic easily. But that particular kind of alertness that comes when a situation suddenly has more gravity than it did 3 seconds ago. Intercepted by who? She looked at the device in her hands. Then she looked up at me, and that's when I got a proper look at her eyes. They were silver white, like starlight through deep water, and they were exhausted and frightened and carrying something enormous. The Draknari Syndicate, she said. I knew the name. Everyone on Meridian Station knew the name, but most people knew it the way you know the name of a disease, from a distance, as a concept, not as something real and immediate, and standing between you and the door. The Draknari Syndicate was what happened when the Accords opened trade routes, and not everyone who traveled those routes was interested in trade. They operated in the outer margins, the unsurveyed corridors between star systems where the law was more of a suggestion, and they specialized in high-value targets. Ransom, leverage, silence. In 3 years of threat assessment, I'd filed 7 reports that mentioned the Syndicate. All 7 had been forwarded upward, and I'd never heard back. Standing in the dim amber light of Dock 7, Looking at a girl who was made of deep ocean color and old starlight, I understood why. "Are they on the station?" I asked. "Not yet," she said, "but they will be. They tracked the shuttle. They will know I escaped. They will search." "How long?" She glanced at the device again. 30 minutes, perhaps less. 30 minutes. I ran the numbers the way I'd been trained to run them. Station security response time, 12 minutes minimum, longer if they were running a shift change. Interspecies incident protocol, mandatory consultation with the diplomatic liaison before any action involving a non-human, which added another 15 minutes at best. Evacuation of Dock 7, possible but visible, which would tell the syndicate exactly where she was. 30 minutes. "What's your name?" I asked. She seemed surprised by the question, like it hadn't occurred to her that I'd want to know. "Sora," she said, "Princess Sora Vel Ainith, third daughter of the High Throne of Velen." The High Throne of Velen. I'd read the briefing documents. The Velen were the most powerful species in the Cathari Coalition, the group of 7 systems that had, collectively, been our primary diplomatic partner since the Accords. The High Throne wasn't just political power. It was the closest thing the Coalition had to a singular governing authority. The person who held it could, theoretically, move fleets. The person in front of me was the third daughter of the being who held it. "Okay," I said, and then, because nothing else seemed adequate, "I'm going to need to make a call." The call I made was not to station security. It was to Marcus Vale. I want to be careful about how I explain Marcus, because the temptation is to make him sound like something out of a story, a legend, a hero, a man built for moments like this. And that's not wrong exactly, but it's also not the full picture. Marcus was not a comfortable person. He was not easy or warm or the kind of person you'd invite to a dinner party unless you wanted the conversation to be challenging. He was 44 years old, built like someone who had spent those 44 years doing things that required a body to be more than decorative. He had a face that had been broken and repaired and broken again, and had settled into something that was not handsome but was absolutely unforgettable. His hands were too large. His voice was too quiet. He had a habit of going very still when he was thinking, the way predators go still, and it made people around him nervous in ways they couldn't always articulate. He was officially listed as a civilian consultant, Special Operations Division, which was the station's polite way of not explaining what he actually did. What he actually did was solve problems that the official systems weren't equipped to solve. He'd been doing it for 15 years on Earth in the outer colonies on 3 different stations before Meridian. He'd been recruited by people who recognized a specific quality in him and didn't have a clean word for it. The closest I've come to describing it is this. Marcus Vale was someone who, in a crisis, became more himself. Most people shrink under pressure. Marcus expanded. I'd worked with him twice before. I trusted him completely, which is not something I say about many people. He picked up on the second ring. Orin, his voice was exactly as I remembered it, low, careful, the kind of voice that didn't raise itself. "I need you at Dock 7, I said. "Right now, no announcement, no escort, come quiet." A pause, not hesitation, assessment. "How bad?" "Draknari." 30 minutes, maybe less, and I have someone with me who matters. Another pause, shorter. 7 minutes, he said. He made it in 5. I've tried to describe, afterward, the moment Marcus walked into Dock 7, and I've never quite gotten it right. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't come in fast, didn't announce himself, didn't do anything that should have commanded attention. He just walked through the maintenance door at the far end of the dock at a steady pace, wearing a civilian jacket over standard station clothes, his hands loose at his sides. But Sora saw him and went completely still. I've seen that reaction before in prey animals. That moment of absolute freeze when something enters a space, and the nervous system can't immediately classify it as safe or dangerous. But what was interesting about Sora's freeze was that it didn't look like fear. It looked like something she was trying to figure out, like she was looking at something that didn't fit the category she expected. Marcus crossed the dock and stopped about 6 feet away from her. He didn't look at her the way most people look at a member of a non-human species for the first time, with that mix of fascination and uncertainty. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, like he was reading a situation, collecting information, deciding what mattered. Then he looked at the torn shoulder of her dress, the stain along her left side. "You're hurt," he said. "Not a question." "It is not serious," she said through the translation shimmer. "Let me see." She blinked. "I do not." "I know you don't know me," he said, "but we don't have time for a long introduction. If you're hurt in a way that's going to slow you down in the next 20 minutes, I need to know now." Sora looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled aside the torn fabric at her side. It was a burn, not a conventional burn, some kind of energy discharge, smaller and more precise than a weapon, but larger than an accident. It had darkened the skin around it to something close to black, and the edges were ragged. It looked painful in the specific way that things look painful when the person carrying them has been ignoring the pain for long enough that their body has reorganized itself around it. Marcus looked at it without expression. Then he unzipped a pocket in his jacket and produced a compact kit, the kind every field operative carries, small enough to disappear in your hand, and he knelt down. "This is going to help for now," he said. "Not fix it, but it'll hold." Sora watched him work. Her expression was complicated. "You are not military," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Not anymore," he said. "But you were." "Yes." "What changed?" He looked up at her briefly. "The things I was willing to do for an organization were different from the things I was willing to do for myself." She was quiet for a moment. "You left." "I left. And now?" "Now I do what seems right." He pressed the closure seal on the dressing. "Which tonight appears to be this." We had 22 minutes by my count when the first alert came through. Not a station alarm. Those would have been too visible, too loud, too likely to scatter the population in ways that the syndicate could use. It was a quiet alert, a private channel, routed through a back-end security node that Marcus had apparently set up access to at some point that he hadn't mentioned to me. His phone buzzed once, and he looked at it, and his expression, which was already controlled, became more so. "3 ships," he said, "just entered the inner approach corridor. They're running Meridian registration codes, but the IFF signatures aren't matching the registry. Station traffic control hasn't flagged it yet. They're still running the standard scan cycle." "How long until they dock?" "Depends on which bay they use." He looked around the dock, the sealed outer doors, the empty cradle, the maintenance equipment stacked against the far wall. "They'll come to 7 if they've tracked her signal, or they'll send people in through the passenger terminals and work inward." Either way we need to move." He looked at Sora. "Your ship, 11 kilometers, you said." "Yes." "Can you reach it from here if we can get the outer doors open?" She looked at the doors. "The shuttle I was on, it is gone. I have no." "Not asking about the shuttle," he said. "I'm asking about you. Can you communicate with your ship? Get them to send a retrieval vehicle." "If I have a signal relay strong enough to..." She stopped, looked at me. I knew what she was going to ask before she asked it. "The station's main comm array," I said. "Level 12, but it's in the center of the station, which means we'd have to cross." "I know where it is," Marcus said, "and I know another way to get there." He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without decoration, the way a person states a fact they've verified. Not "I think" or "maybe" or "there might be," just "I know." I've since learned that Marcus spent his first 6 months on Meridian Station walking every corridor, every maintenance shaft, every service access route, every ventilation trunk that was large enough to move through. He did it because that's what he'd always done, learned the ground before he needed to use it. It was the kind of preparation that looks, in ordinary times, like obsession. In moments like this, it looks like something else entirely. "How many of them?" he asked. "I do not know," Sora said. "The shuttle was intercepted by 2 Draknari enforcement units. Each unit consists of..." She paused, and I had the sense she was translating not just language but a whole system of classification. 8 to 12 soldiers, plus command personnel. "So anywhere from 16 to 30, he said. "At minimums." He nodded once, not surprised, not intimidated, just noted. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." Part 2, the corridors remember. Here's something nobody tells you about Meridian Station. Something that doesn't make it into the promotional materials, or the diplomatic briefings, or the officially sanctioned documentary. that I understand the Earth Communications Bureau produced about interspecies cooperation. The old corridors smell different from the new ones. The original structure, Orbital Platform 9, before the expansion, was built in the 2070s when we were still building things with materials and methods that had texture to them. Metal that had been worked rather than printed. Seals that used compounds that aged and dried and left behind a particular mineral smell, almost geological, like the inside of an old mine. And because the original structure was now buried under the expansion rings, threading through them like the trunk of a tree inside a forest, those corridors were mostly maintenance access now, low light, narrow, smelling of old metal and closed air. Marcus moved through them like he lived there. He was in front, moving at a pace that was faster than a walk but not quite a run, the trained operative's middle gear, covering ground without burning energy, without making unnecessary noise. I was in the middle. Sora was behind me, and I'll tell you something about her. She was better on her feet than she'd looked sitting on the docking cradle edge. Whatever pain the burn at her side was causing her, she wasn't letting it reach her legs. "Third junction left," Marcus said quietly, not looking back. "Then down." "Down," I said. "Service access, faster than the main corridors." The third junction opened into a shaft, not a proper corridor but a rectangular access space with rungs set into the wall and conduit pipes running along both sides. The light was orange emergency lighting, barely enough to see by. Marcus went down without hesitating. I followed. Sora came last, moving carefully but steadily. Below the junction level, the shaft opened into something larger. A horizontal maintenance trunk that ran, as near as I could tell, roughly parallel to the station's primary ring. It was maybe 5 feet wide and just tall enough to stand in, and it was occupied by a jungle of pipes and cables, and the occasional incomprehensible box of equipment that no one would have been able to identify without the technical schematics. "How far?" I asked. 6 minutes if we move right." We moved right. He found things in the dark that I couldn't see until we were past them. A place where a cable had dropped from its bracket and was hanging across the path. A section where the floor was slick from a condensation leak. A junction box whose housing had cracked and left a sharp edge at shoulder height. He pointed at each of them without slowing, brief gestures that managed to be perfectly clear in the dark, and I passed each warning back to Sora behind me. She took them without complaint. At some point, maybe 2 minutes into the trunk, she said something quiet in her own language, presumably to herself. The translation shimmer caught it partially. "This man walks as if the darkness is his." I didn't pass that one back. Marcus stopped at a second shaft, this one running upward. "Level 8 from here," he said. "Then we have to cross the open ring." The open ring? He meant the atrium level, which ran the full circumference of the station's main body. It was the largest open space on Meridian, 3 floors tall in the center, lined with commercial and communal spaces, usually populated at most hours because the station's rotation created a day-night cycle that was somewhat artificial, and a lot of people simply chose to ignore it. At this hour it wouldn't be crowded, but it wouldn't be empty. "They'll be looking for her," I said. "They'll be looking for a Velen female in diplomatic dress," Marcus said. He looked at Sora. "How attached are you to what you're wearing?" She looked down at herself, at the torn formal layers, the silver and gold that caught even the orange emergency light. "It is ceremonial," she said, "but I am not at this moment greatly concerned with ceremony." Something crossed Marcus's face, not a smile exactly, but an approximation of one. He produced from somewhere a folded equipment vest and a maintenance crew jacket, the dark gray of standard station work. He held them out. "It'll look strange," he said, "but it'll look like station strange, not diplomatic strange. People will think you're maintenance crew from one of the outer system species who pulled a longer shift than expected." She took them, pulled the jacket over her formal wear with a pragmatic efficiency that told me more about her than any briefing document could have. "Do I look convincing?" Marcus studied her for exactly 2 seconds. "You look like someone who's worked here long enough to stop caring what people think." "Good," she said. We went up the shaft. The atrium at 1:45 station time was not empty, but it was quieter than it would have been 6 hours earlier. A few clusters of beings moving between commercial bays that were still running second cycle hours. A pair of Cathari in their thermal wrap outer layers, moving slowly the way they do when they're in cold-adapted mode. A group of human cargo workers eating something from a cart and talking loudly about a logistics dispute that seemed very important to all of them. The ambient sound of the station, its constant mechanical life, the bass vibration of the drives, the translation arrays running on low across all public spaces. We crossed the atrium in a loose group, not together enough to look coordinated, not separated enough to look like we were trying not to be together. Marcus set the pace, casual, purposeful, the walk of someone with somewhere to be who is not particularly concerned about getting there. I watched the other spaces without moving my eyes toward them. A trick you learn in observation work, peripheral vision as information gathering. Your face pointed at something neutral while your attention moves. I saw them at the transit junction on the far side of the atrium. 4 of them, Draknari. I should describe the Draknari because they're not a species that most people outside the outer corridors have much direct experience with. They're bipedal, roughly human-shaped in the sense that the arrangement of limbs is recognizable, but the similarities stop there. They tend toward height. Most of the ones I'd seen in intelligence files were in the 6'5" to 7' range, and their exoskeletal plating gives them a density that makes them look like they're in armor even when they're not. The plating ranges in color depending on the individual and the regional lineage, but the 4 in the atrium were all a dark, matte color, somewhere between charcoal and rust, that I recognized from the threat files as a northern outer marking. They were moving with the particular quality of people who are looking for someone, and trying not to look like they're looking for someone. I kept walking. The thing about a moment like that, when you're carrying a secret across an open space, and the people looking for that secret are 20 meters away, is that the worst thing you can do is nothing. Standing still is visible. Hesitating is visible. The right move is to keep doing the thing you were doing at exactly the rate you were doing it, because ordinary motion blurs into background. Marcus knew that. He didn't change pace, he didn't look at them. Sora was between us, and I felt rather than saw the slight change in her movement, a tightening. A micro-hesitation, the body recognizing threat before the conscious mind catches up. Marcus's hand came down on her shoulder, a gentle pressure, not restraining, steadying. She kept walking. We made it to the far corridor. I didn't breathe properly until we were around the corner. "They're faster than I expected," Marcus said quietly, still moving. "Someone in traffic control tipped them, or they have a scanner that's more sensitive than the standard array. Can we outrun them to level 12? "We can outrun them anywhere on this station," he said. "I know more ways than they do. There are 30 of them." Maybe, he didn't slow, numbers aren't always what matter. I wanted to argue with that. The analytical part of my brain, the part that runs probability assessments for a living, wanted to point out that numbers matter quite a lot, actually, especially when the numbers are armed and motivated and familiar with violence. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he said it, not boastfully, not dismissively, but with the calm precision of someone who had looked at this kind of math many times and had long since arrived at a conclusion about it. Or maybe it was what I'd seen him do 4 years earlier, in the Kethari corridor incident that I'm still not fully authorized to discuss. Either way, I didn't argue. Level 12 of Meridian Station was, in theory, a restricted access communication and operations level. In practice, it was also the place where 3 different infrastructure projects had been running simultaneously for the past 8 months, which meant that the access restrictions had been temporarily, and very sloppily, modified to allow construction crews in and out at all hours. It was one of those administrative oversights that looks harmless until it doesn't. Marcus had noted it 7 months ago. Of course he had. We came up through a second service shaft into a storage area adjacent to the main comm array room. The storage area smelled of construction polymer and old equipment manuals. A single work lamp was running in the corner, motion-activated and dim. Sora moved immediately to the interface panel on the wall. Apparently she'd recognized what the room connected to before I'd worked it out. "Can you use our equipment?" I asked. "The underlying protocols," she said, running her hands over the interface with the confident certainty of someone who understood systems at a level below their surface presentation, "are more universal than your engineers believe." She was in within 90 seconds. Marcus stood at the door, not looking through it. The door was closed. He was just standing near it, completely still in that way he had. And I knew from having worked with him before that he wasn't waiting. He was listening, taking in everything the space was telling him, vibration through the floor, air movement from the ventilation, the patterns of sound from the corridors outside. "They've split up," he said almost to himself. "How do you?" The sound pattern changed. When you have a search group moving together, the footfall has a specific rhythm. When they split, it fragments. He paused. "They've sent maybe 8 this direction. The rest are probably covering the docking bays." 8 is still manageable, he said. I looked at him. He was looking at the door. "Marcus," I said, "what are you going to do?" He turned and looked at me then, and his expression was, I've thought about this a lot afterward. It wasn't brave, exactly. It wasn't the look of someone performing courage for an audience. It was more like the look of someone who had, a long time ago, made a decision about what they were willing to do when it mattered, and was now simply carrying out that decision in the way you carry out any decision you made before the moment required it. "My job," he said. Then he looked at Sora. "How long do you need?" She looked up from the interface. 3 minutes, maybe 4. He nodded. "I'll give you 5. Part 3, what a human does." What happened next, I saw most of it, and the rest I've pieced together from the security footage that Station Ops pulled for the debrief. I want to be honest about which is which. Marcus opened the storage room door and stepped into the corridor. I don't know exactly what he was carrying. The standard civilian toolkit that station consultants are permitted includes some things that are technically equipment and some things that are technically other things. And Marcus had probably spent some time over the past years making sure that the line between those categories was as blurry as legally possible. But I know he had the folding baton he always carried. I'd seen it before, collapsed into something the size of a pen and tucked into his left sleeve. And I know he had the static pulse device that was listed in his equipment manifest as a portable EMP diagnostic tool. It was not principally used for diagnostics. The first of the Draknari appeared at the end of the corridor about 40 seconds after Marcus stepped out. From the security footage, one soldier advanced scout moving with professional quiet, plating the color of rust charcoal. A weapon drawn. Draknari personal weapons are long-barreled, low-profile things that fire focused plasma, and the design means they're excellent at range but cumbersome in close quarters. Marcus didn't run toward him. He walked. This is the part that people always focus on when I tell this story, and I understand why, because it seems like the least rational choice. The man had a plasma weapon, and Marcus was walking toward him with his hands in his jacket pockets. But here's what you have to understand. In every close-quarters situation Marcus had ever been in, and there had been many over 15 years, he had identified the same recurring truth. Distance is the enemy's friend. It gives them time to react, time to aim, time to make the situation what they trained for. Closing the distance fast before they can process and adapt changes the situation into something different. Walking did it differently. Walking confused the processing. The approach was non-threatening in posture but non-stopping in momentum, and the combination created a small delay, a micro-hesitation, while the Draknari soldier's threat assessment system tried to categorize what it was seeing. That micro-hesitation was enough. He was inside the weapon's effective range before the soldier could recalibrate, and then the baton was out, and the situation was different. I'm not going to describe the next 12 seconds in detail, partly because some of it happened very fast and the camera angle wasn't clean, partly because Marcus, when I asked him about it later, described it so briefly and without any apparent sense that it was remarkable that I'm not sure I could add anything useful. What I'll say is this. The Draknari soldier was significantly larger than Marcus. The exoskeletal plating offered protection that human skin obviously doesn't. And yet, 3 seconds after the first contact, the soldier was on the floor of the corridor, and Marcus was already moving toward the sound of the others coming. There were 7 more. They came around the corner in a group, which was a tactical error. In a narrow corridor, numbers become less of an advantage because they can't spread out. Marcus used the static pulse device on the first 2, which dropped their weapons because the pulse interrupted the power cells that the Draknari personal weapons run on. In the footage, You can see the weapons spark and die in the soldier's hands, and you can see the soldier's own plating react, not harmfully, but enough to create a moment of physical confusion. That moment of physical confusion was what Marcus worked with. I'm going to tell you something that I've told very few people, because it sounds like the kind of thing someone says in a movie and then everyone rolls their eyes. But it's true, and I watched the footage enough times to be certain of it. Marcus didn't look like he was fighting. He looked like he was thinking. Every movement was a conclusion, not a reflex. This soldier's arm is here, so my body goes here. That soldier's weight is on that foot, so the floor goes there. The corridor narrows at this point, so two of them can't come at once from this angle. He was reading the space and the bodies in it the way he read everything, with complete attention, without noise, updating constantly. By the time 4 minutes had passed, 6 of the 8 soldiers were on the floor of the corridor, and the other 2 had retreated back around the corner. Marcus was breathing harder than when he'd started. He was holding his left arm in a way that suggested something had connected with it that he hadn't been able to avoid. There was a mark along his jaw that was going to be spectacular by morning. But he was standing. He turned back to the storage room door and knocked twice, the signal we'd agreed on. Inside, Sora had done it. The station's primary comm array had been calibrated to the frequency of the Velen ship 11 kilometers out, and she'd sent a compressed signal in her own encoding, something so dense with authentication, protocols that the station's own systems had flagged it as an anomaly but hadn't been able to block it. The response had come back in seconds. Her ship was moving. Retrieval window, 14 minutes. "They'll be back," I said when Marcus came back in. "Yes. With more. Probably. So we need to move again." "Not to Dock 7, Marcus said. He was looking at a schematic on his phone, the station layout, real and unofficial, the version that includes all the service access he'd mapped himself. "To Dock 3. 3 is smaller, secondary dock, not scheduled for use for another 18 hours. And the outer doors are operable on manual, which means we don't need a dock master to open them." He looked at Sora. "Can your retrieval vehicle dock without automated guidance?" She considered. "If the outer doors are open and the space is clear, yes, the pilot can manage." "Then let's go," he said. Part 4, 14 minutes. I want to tell you about those 14 minutes honestly, because the official version of them is sanitized in ways that matter. The official version says, Marcus Vale and Commander Orin escorted Princess Sora Vel Aneth to Dock 3, where she was successfully retrieved by a Velen ship. Incident concluded with no civilian casualties. Draknari parties apprehended by station security responding to the disturbance. That's all true. It leaves out some things. It leaves out the second group of Draknari, not 8 this time, something closer to 15, who came through the atrium level just as we were crossing back into the lower corridors, and who had apparently been given a more precise location fix, possibly from the same corrupted station access that had told them which bay to start with. It leaves out the 11 minutes between that moment and our arrival at Dock 3, during which Marcus was doing things in service access tunnels and maintenance corridors that I was watching from approximately 6 feet away and can still not fully explain. I can explain the tactics in retrospect. He was using the tunnel network to control where they could follow and where they couldn't. The Draknari's size advantage became a disadvantage in the narrow shafts. They couldn't move fast through them, couldn't maneuver, couldn't use their weapons without risk to the surrounding structure. Marcus moved through them like water. But what I couldn't explain then or now was the quality of it. Not the skill. I understood the skill, the quality. There is a thing that happens to some people in extremis under sustained threat, when the ordinary noise of cognition drops away and something underneath it becomes available. Athletes talk about it. Surgeons talk about it. Certain musicians talk about it, the moment when you stop thinking about the playing and the playing simply happens. Marcus, in those 11 minutes, was not thinking about what he was doing. He was just doing it. And it was the most purely competent thing I have ever watched a human being do. At minute 9, Sora was hurt again. Not badly, a glancing contact with an energy discharge from a weapon that someone had fired somewhat recklessly in a tunnel where firing was a bad idea. It caught her along the arm she'd raised to shield her face, and she made that sound again. The one I'd heard when I first found her. The sound of something giving out, but this time it was shorter because she caught it, controlled it, pushed it down. Marcus was beside her before I'd finished processing what had happened. "I'm fine," she said before he could say anything. "I know," he said, and then, "Keep moving." She did. Later, much later, after everything was over and we were in the debrief room and Sora had been connected with her people, and Marcus was sitting across from me with an ice pack on his left arm and a stillness that had settled into something like exhaustion, I asked her about that moment. He said, "I know," I said. "Not are you sure, or let me look." She thought about it. "Yes." "Did that bother you?" "No," she considered more carefully. "Most people, when they say I know in that moment, mean I don't believe you, but I'll allow you your pride. That is a kind of condescension." She paused. "He meant, I know you are capable of knowing your own body. I trust that judgment. Now let's move. That is a different thing." I thought about that for a long time. Dock 3 was dark and cold. It ran on an even lower power mode than 7, with minimal atmospheric processing, and the temperature was noticeably lower than the rest of the station. The outer doors were sealed, but, as Marcus had said, operable on manual, a great circular wheel of a mechanism mounted on the interior wall, the kind of thing that hasn't changed in ship design since humans first started building pressurized vessels because the basic physics hasn't changed. Marcus spun it open while I watched the access door behind us. The outer doors pulled back, slow and grinding in a way that spoke of mechanisms that were maintained but rarely used, and the stars came in. Not light, stars are too far for that mostly, just the sense of them. The vast dark presence of open space where the wall used to be, separated from us by the magnetic containment field that kept the atmosphere from evacuating. Through the field, space looked slightly warped, slightly thick, like looking through very old glass. Sora went to the edge and looked out. I watched her face. I don't know what she felt, looking out at the space between herself and her ship. Relief, presumably, but also something else. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, the cold air moving through the dock, her expression composed in a way that I was beginning to recognize as the particular composure of someone who had spent their life composing themselves in public and had gotten very good at it. Then she turned. "Your ship is 4 minutes out," her translation shimmer relayed, the signal finally clear now that she was close to the open doors and had a direct line to the retrieval vehicle. "They can see the dock." "Good," Marcus said. He was leaning against the wall with the particular quality of leaning that people use when they don't want to admit they need to rest. His left arm was held slightly away from his body. His jaw was darkening visibly. Sora looked at him. "You are injured," she said. "It's fine." "You said that with the same certainty I said my side was fine earlier." He looked at her. She looked back. Something passed between them that I'm not sure I'm equipped to describe. Some form of mutual recognition between two people who both understood what it meant to carry something and not put it down. "It'll hold," he said. "Yes," she said. "I believe it will." The retrieval vehicle came in at minute 13, sleek and dark, Velen design, which means curves where human ships have angles and surfaces that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. It entered through the magnetic field without touching the frame on either side, which told me the pilot was exceptional, and it settled into Dock 3's cradle with a smoothness that was almost surprising given the cramped space and the non-standard guidance situation. A door opened. 2 Velen emerged, guards clearly in the deep-colored armor of the high-throne security detail. They came to Sora quickly and spoke to her in their language, and she responded, and even without the translation I could see the shape of the exchange. "Are you hurt?" "Yes, but I'm all right." "We'll get you home, I know." She turned back to us. "Me, Marcus." She looked at Marcus for a long time. "I don't know your word," she said finally. "In my language, there is a word for a person who acts from principle when principle is the hardest available choice. We use it rarely, only when we mean it." Marcus said nothing. "I don't know if there is a translation," she said, "but I want you to know what you did tonight, it wasn't for your government or your station or any agreement between our peoples." She paused. "It was for me, a stranger, an inconvenience, a problem you didn't ask to have." "You asked for help," he said. That was enough. She held his gaze for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she did something I hadn't seen her do yet. She bowed. A full, formal bow, the kind that carries weight in Velen culture, the kind she definitely didn't owe to a civilian consultant with a bruised arm and a split jaw. Marcus received it with the same stillness he received everything. Then the Velen guards guided her back toward the ship, and one of them paused at the door and said something, and the translation Shimmer caught it. The High Throne will know this name. The door closed. The ship left. The dock was quiet again. Part 5 after. Station security arrived in Dock 3 approximately 6 minutes after the Velen ship departed. The debrief was long. The administrative aftermath was longer. There were forms, so many forms, interspecies incident reports, unauthorized comm array usage documentation, maintenance access violation logs for every service tunnel we'd moved through. The Draknari Syndicate members who'd been apprehended, station security, had caught them while they were still trying to figure out what had happened. Needed processing through a legal framework that was still being written in real time, because nobody had yet agreed on exactly how the Accords governed criminal enforcement across species lines. I sat through all of it. Marcus sat through some of it. Specifically, he sat through the parts where his presence was legally required, gave answers that were complete and accurate and completely without elaboration, and waited. He had his arm properly treated by the station medical team, which revealed a hairline fracture that he had been carrying for the last 40 minutes without visible acknowledgement. The medic who found it looked at Marcus with an expression of professional disapproval that bounced off him like light off composite hull material. "You should feel this," the medic said. "I did," Marcus said. "I just didn't let it vote." 3 days later, I received a communication through the station's diplomatic channel. It was short, in Velen, and my translation array handled it well. Commander Yale Oren, Strategic Observer, United Earth Defense Corps. A formal communication from the Office of the High Throne of Velen will follow through proper channels. This is not that communication. This is a personal note from someone who is no longer in Dock 7, who is home, who is well, who remembers the corridor sounds and the cold of that dock, and a man who walks like the darkness is his, and who wanted you to know. I told my father what happened, not the diplomatic version, the real one. He asked me one question: what are humans? I told him I could not answer for all of them, only for the ones I had met. He found this response acceptable. S. I read it twice. Then I went and found Marcus. He was where he usually was when he wasn't being required to be somewhere else. In the observation bay on the station's uppermost ring, the one that points outward, away from the sun, into the deep space that has no particular name or designation, just the unclassified dark that goes on past everything we've mapped. He was sitting in the chair closest to the glass, doing nothing, just looking. "You got the message?" I asked, though I knew he had because it had been copied to his file per protocol. "Yes. What did you think?" He was quiet for a moment, in that particular way of his where the silence is full. "I think," he said, "she'll be all right." "Is that all?" He turned and looked at me. And this time there was something in his expression that was different from the carefully regulated neutrality of the corridors and the debrief room. Something quieter and older. "She asked for help," he said, "in a dock that was dark and empty, and she was alone, and her communications were down, and she had 30 minutes, and I happened to be there." He paused. "I don't need it to be more than that." I looked at him. "But it was more than that," I said. He turned back to the window. The stars outside didn't move. They never moved from this distance. They just held their positions in the dark, enormous and fixed and entirely indifferent to the small heated things that moved through the spaces between them. "Maybe," he said, "but she's home. That's the part that matters." Epilogue: what the station remembers. 6 weeks after that night, a formal communication arrived from the High Throne of Velen. It was addressed to the station, officially, and to the United Earth Defense Corps, and it contained language about interspecies cooperation and the enduring importance of the Meridian Accords and the Velen people's gratitude for the safety of their citizens on human-administered stations. All the right words, properly placed, appropriately weighted. Attached to the formal communication was a secondary document, designated personal, addressed to Marcus Vale. I don't know everything it contained. The parts that Marcus chose to share with me were these. The High Throne had authorized a permanent diplomatic attaché from Velen to Meridian Station, which was a level of political investment that the station administration had been quietly trying to arrange for 2 years. The attaché would carry, as part of their official designation, a Velen honorific that I don't have the proper language to explain, except that it translates, very roughly, as received under the protection of a named human. Named human meaning Marcus. The Draknari Syndicate was, apparently, having a very difficult several weeks. Sora had provided intelligence to the Velen Security Service during her debriefing that had enabled the Coalition to move against several Syndicate operations in the outer corridors. The mechanisms were complex, and the politics were more complex still, but the short version is, the thing she'd been carrying in her head when she sat on the edge of that docking cradle with her communications broken and her side burned, the thing she'd been trying to protect had gotten through after all. It had gotten through because one person had asked what was wrong, and then done something about it. I've been asked in the years since to characterize Marcus Vale. It comes up in briefings, in official documents, in the occasional conversation with a journalist or a diplomat who's heard something and wants to understand it better. What kind of person is he? What made him do what he did? Is he exceptional, and if so, in what way? I've given different answers at different times, depending on what the questioner actually needed. But the honest answer, the one I always come back to when I'm sitting quietly and thinking about it, is this. He is the kind of person who did not need a reason beyond the one she gave him. She asked for help. That was enough. In a universe that had recently gotten very large very fast, in a station that sat at the edge of everything humans knew and the beginning of everything they were still figuring out, in a dark dock that smelled of old metal and recycled air, with 30 minutes and 30 soldiers and odds that looked, from the outside, not great. It was enough. The stories we tell about moments like that tend to become something larger than the moments themselves. The moment becomes a metaphor, a symbol, a representative anecdote about what humans are or what humans might be or what humans hope to be in the face of the immensity that the universe keeps presenting to us. I understand that impulse. I felt it myself. But I was there, and what I saw was simpler than any metaphor and more durable than any symbol. I saw a man who, when someone was alone in the dark and asked for help, helped. Whatever the universe is, whatever we are in it, whatever the Velen High Throne decides to call it in their formal language. That's the part I keep coming back to. That's the part that stays.